Not everything in your life needs to collapse for you to begin again. Sometimes the quiet exhaustion you feel is already enough. Sometimes the way your body resists pushing forward is the signal you've been waiting for. If you're here right now, it's because something inside you knows that forcing yourself to continue the same way is no longer. Not everything in your life needs to collapse for you to begin again. Sometimes the quiet exhaustion you feel is already enough. Sometimes the way your body resists pushing forward is the signal you've been waiting for. If you're here right now, it's because something inside you knows that forcing yourself to continue the same way is no longer strength, it's self-abandonment. And the moment you recognize that, a new beginning quietly opens. Not one that demands urgency, but one that asks for honesty. Starting over doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always come with fireworks, bold declarations, or sudden clarity. Most of the time, starting over begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the space where exhaustion finally outweighs resistance. It begins when you realize that forcing yourself forward the same way is no longer strength. It's self-abandonment. This is not the kind of beginning that demands urgency. This is the kind that asks for honesty. And if you're here listening to this, it's because something inside you already knows that pushing harder isn't the answer anymore. Well, there comes a moment when the body speaks louder than ambition, when the mind grows tired of pretending it's fine, when the soul withdraws just enough to make you notice that the way you've been surviving is no longer sustainable. You may not have failed, but you are depleted. And depletion is not a moral flaw. It is a signal that you've been carrying too much, too fast, for too long, without tenderness. Starting over gently begins with recognizing that truth without judgment. Gentle beginnings are often misunderstood. They are mistaken for weakness because they don't announce themselves. But gentleness is not the absence of strength. It is strength that has learned restraint. It is wisdom that knows healing does not respond to force. You cannot bully yourself into wholeness. You cannot shame yourself into peace. And you cannot punish yourself into becoming who you're meant to be. A gentle start is not giving up. It is choosing a different kind of courage. Many people wait for a breaking point to allow themselves to change. They believe transformation must be earned through suffering, but that belief keeps people trapped far longer than necessary. You do not need to be completely destroyed to begin again. You do not need permission from your past pain. You do not need to hit rock bottom. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop mid-collapse and say, I will not continue like this. That decision, quiet, unseen, internal, is still a beginning. Starting over gently means you stop asking, how do I fix everything? And start asking, what is the smallest act of care I can offer myself right now? It means releasing the pressure to reinvent your entire life at once. Pressure fractures fragile things. Gentleness preserves them. And right now, you don't need pressure. You need preservation. You need space to breathe without being chased by expectations, comparisons, or timelines that were never meant for you. This is especially difficult for those who have learned to survive by being strong. If you are used to enduring, pushing, holding everything together, gentleness may feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. You may feel guilty slowing down. You may feel like you're falling behind. But gentleness is not falling behind. It is returning to alignment. It is choosing longevity over burnout, clarity over chaos, and truth over performance. A gentle restart does not erase the past. It does not deny what happened. It simply refuses to let the past dictate the tone of the future. You carry wisdom now. You carry awareness. And those things change how you begin again. This time, you don't have to rush. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to impress anyone. You only have to be present enough to listen to what your inner world is asking for. Not loudly, but consistently. If you're feeling behind in life, it's often because you're measuring yourself by a pace that ignored your wounds. Healing takes time. Reorientation takes time. Learning to trust yourself, again, takes time. Starting over gently is an act of respect toward that process. It is saying, I will not treat my healing like a deadline. And that decision alone can change everything. This is where the restart truly begins, not with action, but with permission to move slower, permission to rest without guilt, permission to rebuild without violence toward yourself. The world may tell you to hurry, to catch up, to prove resilience, but your nervous system, your heart, your spirit, they are asking for something else entirely. They are asking for gentleness, and honoring that request is not weakness, it is wisdom. One of the quietest burdens people carry when starting over is the pressure to return to who they used to be, the old version, the productive one, the hopeful one, the one who didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't feel this tired. But starting over gently requires something most people resist at first. Letting go of the identity that no longer fits. Not because it was wrong, but because it belonged to a different season, with different needs, different limits, and different levels of awareness. You are not meant to rebuild from nostalgia. The past version of you survived with the tools they had at the time, but you have grown since then, even through pain, even through loss, even through confusion. Trying to recreate an old version of yourself often leads to frustration because you're asking a wiser, more sensitive self to live by outdated rules. Gentleness begins when you accept that you are not starting over as the same person. You are starting over as someone who knows more, feels deeper, and understands the cost of ignoring inner signals. There is grief in that realization. Grief for the energy you once had. Grief for the optimism that felt effortless. Grief for the version of you that didn't need to recover. This grief is valid, it deserves space, but it does not get to control the direction forward. Starting over gently means allowing the grief to exist without letting it harden into self-judgment. You don't shame yourself for changing. You honor the reason you had to. Pressure often disguises itself as motivation. It tells you that if you don't move fast, you'll fall behind. That if you slow down, you'll lose momentum. That rest is indulgence, and gentleness is delay. But pressure doesn't create sustainable change. It creates anxiety-driven movement, and anxiety cannot build a stable foundation. It only pushes you until something collapses again. A gentle restart interrupts that cycle before it repeats. Releasing pressure means you stop negotiating with unrealistic expectations. You stop demanding clarity before safety. You stop demanding productivity before stability. You stop asking yourself to perform healing instead of actually experiencing it. This does not mean you give up on growth. It means you redefine growth. Growth becomes consistency instead of intensity, presence instead of perfection, self-trust instead of external validation. There is a deep shift that happens when you stop asking, "What should I be doing by now?" and start asking, what supports who I am becoming? The first question is rooted in comparison. The second is rooted in care. Starting over gently requires that shift because comparison will always rush you, while care will guide you. And guidance lasts longer than force ever could. You may notice discomfort when you release pressure. Silence where urgency used to be. Space where constant striving once lived. That discomfort is not emptiness, it's unfamiliar peace. The nervous system takes time to adjust to safety. If you've lived in survival mode, calm can feel strange at first, but that calm is not a sign that you're doing less. It's a sign that you're no longer at war with yourself. Letting go of who you were does not mean losing your strength. It means allowing your strength to evolve. Strength that once looked like endurance may now look like boundaries. Strength that once looked like resilience may now look like rest. Strength that once looked like silence may now look like honesty. Starting over gently allows those new forms of strength to emerge without resistance. You are not behind because you've changed. You are not broken because you need a softer approach now. You are responding intelligently to what life has taught you. And when you stop forcing yourself to return to an outdated version, you make room for something far more sustainable, a life that fits who you are now, not who you were expected to be. When you've lived for a long time in survival mode, movement becomes automatic. You move because stopping feels dangerous. You act because stillness brings thoughts you don't want to face. You push because slowing down feels like falling apart. So when you decide to start over gently, the first challenge isn't knowing what to do, it's learning how to move without forcing yourself through fear, guilt, or urgency. Forcing has a certain energy to it. It's tense. It's loud inside your body. It feels like holding your breath while pretending you're fine. Gentle movement feels different. It's slower, yes, but more intentional. It comes from listening rather than reacting. And at first, that kind of movement can feel uncomfortable because it requires trust that you don't have to rush to be safe, and trust that pausing won't erase your progress. Starting over gently means you stop confusing momentum with healing. Momentum can carry you far in the wrong direction if it's driven by avoidance. Healing, on the other hand, often begins with small, grounded actions that don't look impressive from the outside. Drinking water, resting when you're tired instead of pushing through, saying no without explaining, choosing one task instead of 10. These are not signs of regression. They are signs of recalibration. You may notice resistance when you try to move more gently. An inner voice might say you're being lazy, unmotivated, or weak. That voice is not truth. It's conditioning. It's the echo of a world that rewarded you for overextending yourself and ignored the cost. Learning to move without forcing means you begin to question that voice instead of obeying it automatically. You ask, is this pressure helping me or harming me? And slowly, your choices change. Gentle movement is sustainable because it respects your limits are not barriers to growth. They are guides. When you honor them, you stop wasting energy fighting yourself. You begin to notice that progress feels steadier when it's built on cooperation rather than conflict. You don't need to conquer your fear every day.
Sometimes you just need to walk alongside it without letting it lead. There is also grief in this stage. Grief for how much you once pushed yourself and how little you listened. That grief may show up as sadness, regret, or quiet anger toward yourself. But starting over gently means you meet that grief with compassion, not punishment. You recognize that you did what you had to do to survive, and now survival is no longer the goal. Stability is, peace is, integration is. Moving without forcing also changes your relationship with time. You stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by alignment. You notice when something feels wrong sooner. You stop ignoring signals until they become crises. You allow yourself to adjust without waiting for permission or collapse. This is not indecision, it's discernment. It's wisdom gained through experience. As you practice this, your body begins to trust you again and your nervous system softens. Decisions feel less frantic. You stop oscillating between extremes of effort and exhaustion. Instead, you move in a way that feels grounded, responsive, and kind. That doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes manageable, and that shift is profound. Starting over gently is not about doing nothing. It's about doing what matters without harming yourself in the process. It's about learning that you don't need to prove your worth through struggle. You are allowed to move forward without pain being the price. And the more you practice that truth, the more natural it becomes. One of the hardest truths to accept when starting over is that healing does not move on a schedule you can control. You can plan goals, routines, and intentions, but healing itself unfolds at its own pace. And when you try to rush it, you don't speed it up. You interrupt it. Starting over gently requires you to stop treating healing like a task to complete and start recognizing it as a relationship you are rebuilding with yourself. Impatience often comes from fear that if you don't move faster, you'll be left behind. Fear that others are advancing while you are paused. Fear that rest means stagnation. But healing does not follow the same timeline as ambition. It responds to safety, consistency, and honesty. When you push yourself to heal quickly, you recreate the very conditions that caused the damage in the first place. Gentleness breaks that pattern. Making peace with your pace means allowing progress to look uneven. Some days you will feel strong and clear. Other days you may feel heavy, uncertain, or emotionally raw. This fluctuation does not mean you are going backward. It means your system is processing. Growth that lasts often moves in waves, not straight lines, and learning to accept those waves is part of starting over in a way that doesn't exhaust you.
There may be moments when you compare your pace to others and feel discouraged. You might wonder why things seem easier for them, or why you're still working through something you thought you'd moved past. But comparison ignores context. It ignores what you've carried, what you've endured, and what your nervous system has had to adapt to. Your pace is not wrong. It's responsive to your reality. Starting over gently also means redefining what success looks like during healing. Success is not constant positivity. It's self-awareness. It's recognizing when you're overwhelmed and choosing to step back instead of pushing through. It's being honest about your capacity without attaching shame to it. These shifts may seem small, but they change the foundation of your life in quiet, lasting ways. There is a deep kind of strength in allowing yourself to be unfinished, to not have all the answers yet, to let clarity arrive gradually instead of forcing decisions before you're ready. When you stop rushing, you begin to notice what you actually need, not what you think you should want. And those needs often lead you toward more sustainable choices. Peace with your pace also requires forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness. Forgiveness for the times you ignored yourself. Forgiveness for staying too long in places that drained you. Forgiveness for believing you had to suffer to deserve rest. Starting over gently means you don't carry those regrets as punishment. You let them become information instead. As you slow down, you may notice subtle changes. Your body relaxes more easily, your thoughts become less harsh, you respond instead of react. These are signs that healing is happening, even if nothing dramatic has changed externally. Quiet progress is still progress, and often it's the kind that lasts. Healing does not ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be present, to show up consistently with care instead of criticism. When you make peace with the pace of healing, you stop fighting yourself. And in that space, something new begins to form. Not rushed, not forced, but steady and real. After exhaustion, disappointment, or emotional overload, trust in yourself often becomes fragile. You may question your decisions, your instincts, or your ability to choose well. Starting over gently means recognizing that self-trust isn't restored through grand promises or sudden confidence. It's rebuilt through small, consistent moments where you show yourself that you will listen, respond, and protect your own well-being. Self-trust is damaged not only by failure, but by self-betrayal, by the times you ignored your needs to please others, by the moments you pushed past your limits, even when your body and mind asked you to stop, by the inner voice you silenced because it felt inconvenient. Starting over gently asks you to repair that relationship, not by blaming yourself, but by changing how you respond now. Rebuilding trust begins with honoring your signals: fatigue, discomfort, hesitation, emotional heaviness. These are not obstacles to success, they are information. When you start respecting these signals instead of overriding them, your system learns that you are safe with yourself. Safety is the foundation of trust. Without it, no amount of motivation will feel stable. This stage often feels subtle, almost anticlimactic. There are no dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, there are quiet decisions: leaving earlier than you used to, resting without apology, choosing honesty over harmony, stopping when something doesn't feel right. Each of these moments may seem insignificant, but together they form a pattern, and patterns build trust. You may also notice that as self-trust returns, your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations, conversations, and environments that once felt normal may now feel draining or wrong. This is not you becoming difficult or overly sensitive. It's you becoming more attuned. Starting over gently sharpens your discernment because you are no longer numb to yourself. There can be fear here too. Fear that if you fully trust yourself, you'll have to make changes you've been avoiding, boundaries you've delayed, endings you've postponed. But self-trust does not demand immediate action. It simply creates clarity, and clarity gives you choice. You move when you're ready, not because you're pressured. Trusting yourself also means allowing yourself to change your mind, to adjust your path without seeing it as failure, to admit when something no longer fits. Rigidity is often mistaken for strength, but flexibility is what allows growth without breaking. A gentle restart gives you permission to evolve without punishing yourself for it. As trust deepens, your inner dialogue changes, the critical voice softens, the constant second-guessing quiets. You begin to feel supported from within rather than driven by fear of getting it wrong. This internal support becomes a steady anchor, especially during uncertainty. You are no longer pushing yourself forward alone. You are moving with yourself. Rebuilding self-trust is not about becoming fearless. It's about becoming responsive. You still feel fear, doubt, and uncertainty. You don't abandon yourself in their presence. You stay, you listen, you choose with care. And that is what makes this stage so powerful. By the time you reach this point in starting over gently, something important has shifted. You no longer need external permission to honor your limits. You no longer measure progress by approval. You are guided by an inner sense of alignment that feels quiet but firm, and that guidance will shape everything that comes next. Starting over gently reaches its deepest meaning when you realize this is not about creating a new version of yourself. It's about returning to yourself without fear. You are not here to erase your past or pretend it didn't shape you. You are here to carry what you've learned without carrying the weight that broke you. This final stage is not loud. It does not announce completion. It settles quietly, like a deep breath you didn't realize you were holding. By now you may notice that the urgency has softened. The need to prove, to rush, to fix everything at once has loosened its grip. That is not because you've given up on growth, but because you've changed how growth feels. It no longer comes from pressure. It comes from presence. You move forward, not because you're running from something, but because you're aligned with yourself again. Beginning again without losing yourself means you no longer sacrifice your inner stability for external progress. You recognize that any path that costs you your peace is too expensive. You understand that rest is not a detour from purpose. It is part of it. And you stop apologizing for the pace that keeps you whole. This is not settling. This is choosing sustainability. There is a quiet confidence that emerges here. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that knows when to step back and when to step forward. You trust your timing. You trust your boundaries. You trust your capacity to respond to life as it unfolds, rather than forcing outcomes before you're ready. That trust becomes your anchor, especially when uncertainty returns. Because it always does. You may still face moments of doubt. You may still feel the pull of old habits or the pressure of expectations. But now you recognize those moments sooner. You respond with care instead of criticism. You pause instead of panic. And in that pause, you protect the self you worked so hard to rebuild. That protection is the quiet promise you keep to yourself. I will not abandon myself again. Starting over gently also means redefining what forward looks like. Forward does not always mean more. Sometimes it means simpler. Sometimes it means quieter. Sometimes it means choosing what nourishes you, even when it doesn't impress anyone else. And when you honor that truth, your life begins to feel less like a performance and more like a place you can live in. This kind of beginning does not demand perfection. It asks for honesty. It does not require certainty. It asks for presence. You don't need to know exactly where you're going. You only need to know how you want to feel while getting there. And that feeling, safety, clarity, self-respect, becomes your compass. Starting over gently is not a one-time decision. It is a way of meeting yourself again and again with patience instead of punishment. Each time you choose softness over force, awareness over avoidance, care over control, you begin again, without losing yourself in the process.